If everybody's ready, we'll call the meeting to order. The Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. Today is committee day. I'd like to thank you all for being here today. If you would, please turn your phones on silent and step out if you need to use it. Commissioner Box. Yeah, we got to have bullet points. But anyway, welcome to Greenville, beautiful town up here in East Tennessee. We do have some special guests today with us. We've got Mr. Clarence and Miss Laura Dyes from Tennessee Fur Harvest Association, and also J.C., I may get this name wrong, Salyard. Is that close enough? And we've got Neil Matlock and Clay Young, both from North American Caviar. Glad to have them all the way from West Tennessee up here. We got the county mayor with us, Mr. Kevin Morrison. This time I'm going to ask if you want to come up and say a few words, Kevin.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert. I would like to, number one, thank all of the commissioners. You don't know how, I got to speak to you, tried to speak to each individual commissioner down at the range this morning, and you don't know how very grateful Greene County is for your generosity in the construction of our range. For those that are here that may be from Middle and West Tennessee, welcome to God's country, by the way. We welcome you to Greenville and Greene County. We've got 69,000 residents here, and on behalf of all of them, welcome to our town, welcome to our county. We hope you have a good experience here. A number of years ago, my predecessors applied for a Wildlife Resources Agency grant to the tune of about $1.2, $1.3 million for the construction of a hunter education and shooting sportsman range complex located down here at 1435 Hal Hennard Road. It was previously a law enforcement facility that was very isolated, very rarely used, even by law enforcement. It really wasn't something to be proud of. It was more or less something to be sort of hidden away. And with these grant dollars, we have turned that facility into a sportsman shooting Disneyland. It is a beautiful facility, and we are very proud, again, of your generosity. We want to take that thing to the next level with sporting clays and a long-range facility there to shoot long-bore weapons as well. So hopefully we made a good first impression that we've used your dollars wisely and very judiciously. Greene County and the Commission has seen the utility of the range and put our own people's tax dollars into that facility to the tune of about $140,000. We have 5 staff members down there and a number of volunteers. They keep that place groomed like a golf course, and we're just extremely proud and extremely grateful for your generosity. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak. Again, enjoy Greenville and Greene County, and when you're back in town, don't hesitate to stop by. Thank you very much.
Danette, would you call the roll, please?
Dennis Gardner. Here. Jimmy Granbery. Here. Steve Jones. Connie King. Here. Jim Ripley. Tony Sanders. Here. James Stroud. Here. Kent Woods. Here. Tommy Woods. Here. Hank Wright. Here. Angie Box. Here. Brian McLerran. Here. Kurt Holbert.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Danette. Director Carter, do you have any announcements?
Not at this time, thank you.
All right. We'll get started. I do have one statement I have to read here. I didn't run this by our attorney, but I'm kidding. My daughter's 6th grade class is watching right now, I think, on Facebook Live. So she sent me and asked me if I'd read this, and I'm a sucker, so I'm going to read it. and I think you're all going to get a kick out of it. But today is my daughter Lainey's birthday, and she is turning 12. I want to wish her a very happy birthday and tell her that I love her. And she wanted me to tell all of y'all that I was the dummy that scheduled this meeting on her birthday. So hopefully they got a kick out of that. But without further delay, Tim Broadbent said in his career he had never seen the Fisheries Committee called on first. So today, in his honor, we're going to start with the Fisheries Committee. So I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Box.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to call up Frank Fiss, Chief of Fisheries, to the front, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So today I'm going to be presenting previews for the commercial, sport, and bait proclamations. But first, I'd like to hear from one of our guests today, Mr. Clay Young, who represents North American Caviar, and he's also the chairman of the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee. And he's asked to come and say a few words about the work they're doing on Asian carp in his area, on Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lakes.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. I'm just going to give you a little brief history of us starting in the carp business. We started a little bit before the aid ship program, and then once that got kicked in, we were averaging around 30 to 45,000 pounds a month, and then we got some bait contracts about 4 months ago, and it's brought our totals. Let's see, June was 70,000, July we hit 112, and last month we hit, what was it, Eric? 198,000. And what is happening, we've grown so much that we are at our max. We invested about 93,000 in the carp business over the last year, and that was parking lot expansion, insulated totes, delivery truck trailers to haul the fish off and all that. And what we are needing right now, well, I'd talk to you, Commissioner Holbert, we're needing freezer space and parking lot repair on that. If you have any questions on that, I can answer it on that.
Any questions from the commission? Mr. Clay Young?
Yes.
Stroud?
Yes, sir.
So you're catching all this carp,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a bunch,
Yes.
and you found a market for it.
Yes, we have a market that the small fish from 8 pound and down, we've got a lobster bait company in Maine that's taking up to a truckload a week right now, but we've got other bait companies that are wanting us to produce too. And with the freezer space that I have, we also have a caviar business. We do buffalo, we do catfish, you know, that was for that.
Right.
And when caviar season comes, that freezer's going to have to go back to that business. And
Pardon my ignorance.
Yes,
Where
sir.
are you located? Sorry.
Paris, Tennessee.
Okay, all right. So you're needing, you're expanding. That's awesome, and that makes me happy to hear that. Let me just sort of ramble here for a second.
Mhm.
A couple of years ago, there was information about Mike Hayes at Reelfoot
Mm-hmm.
that had been contacted, I believe, by the Japanese,
Mm-hmm.
and they were in the market to buy the carp and so forth. And I believe one of his family members, I'm trying to get to the spot here, has a really big amount of freezer space in that area. I don't know if you heard that or whatever, but
That was the Butlers and Son Fish that kind of fell through. They were
it
gonna,
fell- okay.
yeah, it was a meat packing company or something, but the freezers were, 60 years old or something like that. It wasn't worth getting them up and running and
Mhm.
everything like that. But, we're unloading on our property and bringing,
Yeah.
they're fishing Kentucky Lake. We're gonna need it up there. And what we're doing right now is I'm renting a reefer truck that stays on my property. And of course, you know, they run by diesel. Well, it's about $4,500 a month for that. And we're not going to be able to continue that. You know, it's the profit on carp, which we hope in the future can go up. It's not very much.
What is it a pound now?
The fishermen get 13 plus the 7-cent incentive, and then we get 3 cents incentive from the state.
And the other question is about the parking area. You were talking about you needing some parking space?
It's our parking lot. You know, we had a caviar company, catfish, all that.
It's not big enough?
Well, we started, these 18-wheelers are coming in. It was a paved parking lot. You know, they came through, and now it's already starting to crack all over it and everything like that. But we expanded. We had 40, I think it was 42 loads of gravel in, and made a extra, and then brought the driveway out where the 18-wheelers could pull in everything.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Yes,
Appreciate
sir.
it.
Yes, sir. Anybody?
Mr. Young, do you have an idea like how many freezers or kind of a range of kind of what you think you're needing as far as the
What I've
square
had
footage already on
looked
the
at,
parking lot?
it was like somewhere between a 18 to 32 or a 20 to 32 freezer. That will hold about a truck and a half. And that way I can venture out to other, you know, carp, the bait, lobster bait companies, because right now I've got one buying from me. I haven't, you know, I don't have any space to buy extra to if somebody else calls me, because I want to take care of them. But we've had 2 out of Maine and 1 out of Florida contact us about the small fish.
And what about the parking lot? Is it mainly just totally repaved, or
It will need to be
potholes just
repaved, yeah.
resurfaced?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because see, with the caviar business there and all that, we have 3 HACCP plans that run, 1 for the carp, 1 for buffalo, 1, well, actually 4, 1 for catfish, and then we have our own HACCP on the paddlefish and everything. Well, you know, they're real restrictive. You have 1 pothole, water stands in, that's, you know, that causes mosquitoes, whatever. And it's just, it's got to be kept in tip-top shape, you know. But the 18-wheelers have, I mean, Neil sees my parking lot every day. I mean, in the last year, it's, you know, it should have lasted about another 8 or 10 years, and it's probably next year it's going to have to be ripped out and replaced. But the freezer is the main thing. I've got to have one of those, you know, to continue. And yes, ma'am. I had the parking lot and the freezer the other day. It was everything except the unit, and that was a freezer with a dock where you would basically come straight out of the freezer. The truck backs into a pit dock. You go straight in. It was $163,000, and then I'm estimating the unit. They're checking on it right now. It's probably going to be around $20,000-25,000. And then I talked to the USDA. They have a grant program that will pay like 25% of improvements like that. So I'm going to try to further my way with them.
Any more questions?
My question, I guess, for Frank.
Yes.
Frank, is this something the agency would, you know, you consider looking at and see if there's a process we could go through? And I know that it's, we may have to open up a process that allows other folks to apply
Right.
for a grant or funds. But is this something you feel worthy, or what you're
Yes, the expansion of the commercial industry falls right in line with our control strategy for Asian carp. It would be money well invested. We're currently going through the process of finding the money from different places it might be and putting it together and prioritizing that. But certainly the industry, you know, everyone involved in carp, and primarily people that are working on carp on Kentucky, Barkley, even Pickwick Lake a little bit, are a higher priority than, say, setting up shop on the Mississippi River still. So we're still focused in that area because we have an opportunity to reduce carp there and limit their spread upstream. So we still have that strategy in place. That's why we're not, you know, doing this in Memphis, for example. But yeah, this is definitely part of the picture that we're looking at, and we're looking at ways to do this.
How much, what time frame are you thinking?
Well, I don't know when
you need as far as.
we will be, I mean, I have draft priority lists for funding, but it includes some bigger dollar items like barriers for the valley as well. So I'm kind of waiting to see what money is available to scale the priorities accordingly. So if someone, if we decided that we only wanted a barrier, well, it would take for a lot of time to get that money for a barrier, as opposed to this is something shorter term that we could do for hundreds of thousands of dollars instead of millions of dollars. So kind of balancing those two scales when I'm thinking about these priorities. But I'd like to pursue this, definitely.
Commissioner Gardner.
Commissioner Box. Clay, I just got a question, or more of a statement, really. Last night, you and I spoke quite a bit, and one of the questions I asked you was, what happens to your fishermen when you reach capacity at your current freezer level? And what then happens? If you don't mind, if you can just tell everybody what you told me, I think it enlightened us a little bit on how crucial it is that you have the extra freezer space.
Yes. Well, what will happen right now is I have to shut them off on fishing. You know, we will hit a certain number. That's all the space I've got. We're using the reefer truck right now, but at the end of the month, I'm sending it back. It's just not feasible to use it. And that was where I was talking about when paddlefish season comes. We buy from Arkansas, Kentucky, Illinois, some in Missouri. You know, we get a lot of paddlefish meat. I've got a freezer that'll hold 28,000 right now, but we'll have 15, 16, 18,000 at all times in that freezer now, you know, when paddlefish season comes. So that's really cutting the bait is going to be very hard, you know. That's the problem. I'm not going to have the space on that.
Right, and so, with that being said, the paddlefish season, can you narrow that down for me? What's that window?
I'll start, let's see. It would be 1st of November, because we'll start getting some caviar and
1st of November.
meat
Okay.
out of October, out of Illinois and stuff.
You have a fairly urgent need then.
Yes, yes.
And when you say you have to cut them off fishing, do you just tell them to stop fishing, or they show up and you got nowhere to put them?
No,
and they're
I
stuck
mean,
with
we give
fish?
them plenty of time, but, you know, it's, the main part on it is the 8 pound and down. I can move all I can get my hands on 8 pound and up. That's not a storage problem on that. We bought a big flatbed, you know, trailer truck to pull it. We can haul 25,000 pounds a day, you know, up to Kentucky, but it's the bait, the 8 pound and down, what we're really focusing on, because that fish, you're getting it out before it, you know, really has time to spawn, or, you know, if they do.
And you're storing that until you have enough for somebody?
Yes, yes.
got
It
you.
takes me a week
Okay,
to
thank you.
get 45.
I
All
think
right.
that clears up some stuff, at
Okay.
least for me anyway.
All right.
Mr. Young, there's no other facility that does that in your area? How far would a fisherman with the 8 pound and under have to go to
Well, nobody else buys the
so
bait.
you're it?
Yes,
Okay.
we created the market on the small fish.
Okay.
You can haul them to Kentucky, but they only pay 8 cents. We'll see if the fisherman's not paid 13, they
No.
can't get the 7 out of the aid ship, so it's kind of a wash on that. All right, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I think this is very important. I think this has been an uphill battle with Asian carp, and I know our funding is limited, and I know Frank dreams about Asian carp every night. I know
We're looking
worked
for
really
money
hard.
now.
Yeah, and if everybody's in agreement, I think I'd like to make a request to try to get the funding covered for this. Is very important. I think we ask the agency to.
We have other priorities as well in the Asian carp realm too. I mean, we haven't talked about the subsidy. We'll be coming back in the near months to talk about expanding the budget to make sure we have the funding we need to continue the H-chip program, and maybe see if we can have enough to fund all the fish that are planned to be caught, because the H-chip, there's a chance that they could outfish the year's worth of money for the HIP program, and then the music stops too. Then nobody's fishing. So that may be, I don't know where that is in the priority, but they kind of go hand in hand.
Mr. Stroud?
Pardon my ignorance. So the $100 and whatever that is, $1,000 bucks, what, yeah. So we're taking this money and giving it to Clay, right?
No.
We're not. That's what I
We
need
would
to-
look into a program where we would make
That's what I mean.
businesses eligible for such a program, but we also have to be careful that we don't, like, if a buyer were to build out and we used all the money for the subsidy, then we wouldn't be able to subsidize the fish. So we gotta make sure we have the money to do both to get it right. Yeah.
Any more questions? Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate your presentation.
Okay, thank you,
Go
Madam
ahead.
Chairman. I'll continue with the previews, which we do every year this time of year for the upcoming proclamations, which you'll hear next month. So I'll start with the commercial fishing, since we had an introduction to that with Clay here. The proposed changes, that when the agency met to discuss changes for the commercial fishing proclamation, we did not have any early in the year when we would typically have our own organized. And then we went into the June meeting with the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee, and this is a meeting where we're supposed to be getting ideas from commercial fishermen and see what their needs are and talk about issues. So we did that, and there were 4 suggestions that came out of that meeting that I'll talk about here. First is to add more time to fish the embayments on the reservoirs in April and May to harvest Asian carp. Second was to increase the length of the wings, a part of the fyke, pound, and trap nets from 50 to 100 feet. To allow hoop nets, fyke nets, and pound nets on the lower Hatchie River, and to change the size limits on catfish. Just as an overview, I'm going to go into each one of these more thoroughly now. So the first one is to add more time to fish the embayments. The regulations we have now restrict commercial fishermen from fishing in the daytime, essentially, when people are busy fishing for crappie and bass and the other things we care about in the lake. And to do that, that regulation has been in place for many years to eliminate overlap between these 2 user groups. And so far, so good. We haven't had any problems, but we think we need to keep that overlap from happening. So, but the Commercial Fish Advisory Committee made a suggestion that we go from the current 6 a.m. to 1 hour after sunset. So basically, these guys wouldn't be able to set nets until 1 hour after sunset, and they'd have to be out of there by 6 in the morning. We changed that from 5 in the morning last year, if you'll recall. So at this time, the CFAC is asking to change it to 7 in the morning to 5 p.m. So they'd be able to work from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 in the morning. So we discussed that in-house. We've already tried the extra hour, or we did the extra hour recommendation last year, and the commission passed it. We haven't had any issue with that in the mornings, but we're a little worried about moving clear to 7 o'clock in the morning, even though it's just 1 more hour. That's a pretty important hour of the day when people could be getting started fishing. We really want to limit that overlap. When it comes to the hour after sunset, one of the reasons that the CFAC was recommending 5 p.m. was as a number, not just some time after sunset, was to keep it more simple. So they have a number to go by where they don't have to watch the sunset tables. So that was a reasonable request. We feel that we need to go, we don't want that much overlap. A lot of people are fishing after 5 o'clock at night, and we feel that 7 o'clock would be appropriate. 1 hour after sunset in April is like, it would be like 8:15 in the evening. This way, they could start in daylight and get some nets out. So this is a compromise that we would recommend to their request, and we would limit any of these changes to just Kentucky, Pickwick, and Barkley Lakes, where we have the Asian carp fishery in full bloom, so to speak. The second request was to increase the length of wings on fyke, trap, and pound nets from 50 to 100 feet. There's there's a reason that there's a renewed interest in these types of nets. And these are just a couple examples of pound nets, or fyke nets actually. With the one on the left is a traditional trap net, and the one on the right is one that has been promoted for catching Asian carp. And you see where the arrow points there, it has a lead, which is just like a fence underwater to get the fish to go into that barrel-shaped trap. So the renewed interest in these is to catch Asian carp. There are not many people that are commercial fishing with these fyke trap and pound nets at this time. So we'd like to see them try them more for Asian carp, and to be effective, they probably need to have that wing, that lead line be more than 50 feet. They recommended 100 feet. So this is what the change would look like in code, just 50 to 100 feet. But there's also an issue with the webbing, or it's not really webbing, it's the nylon mesh that's used to build out the structure, the sides of the fence, if you will. We want to be careful that we define that twine as very thick stuff that won't be confused for gill net. We don't want someone setting a gill net and calling it a lead, or we don't want someone setting a lead innocently enough but then having the mesh so fine that it does accidentally gill a lot of fish. At the recommendation of the commercial fishermen, they say, well, let's go with the standard that people are using, which is a number 15 cotton or linen. And typically, this material is also dipped in tar to make it last longer. So it's not something the fish is going to get caught in. They're just going to bounce off it or follow it, which is the intent of the lead. So we support this proposal, and we would bring that back next month. Another request was to change the net restrictions on the lower Hatchie River. The language that's underlined in this slide would be the additions to the existing language. And what it does is allow these hoop, fyke, and trap nets and pound nets with 1 inch or greater square to be fished from the Highway 51 bridge down to the Mississippi River. We had it, this Hatchie River regulation was before the commission in a few years ago now, and it was removed altogether, and then it was brought back. And now this is kind of a compromise to say, well, at least let's get these fishermen down in the lower part of the river where we don't expect the user conflicts that we had in the upper river, which made that such a quite controversial regulation when we had it. So I have a map of where this would be. We do support this proposal. We know that fishery down there can handle that, and there's a chance that there'd be some carp work going on in this part of the river as well, particularly in the mouth. One thing I didn't mention about the pound nets is that that's a live capture net. If there are non-target fish in that net, they can be released unharmed. It also helps the commercial fishermen because they only run those maybe every 2 or 3 days by law. And so they don't have to it's not urgent to get those fish out. They have a little bit of flexibility to say, oh, I got that net over there, I'm going to come back for that later. And they can still bring fresh fish to the market. So that's why there's renewed interest in this in this carp realm. So it'd be the lower 38 miles of the Hatchie River. I believe that's like 15% of the whole river we're talking about opening up. So lastly, there was a request to change the length limits on catfish. Currently, there's an upper size limit on catfish of 34 inches. Fish that are over this you can only take one of them a day, and they cannot be alive through commercial methods. They can't be held alive. The Commercial Fish Advisory Committee is asking to change that from 34 to 40 inches on all the waters of the state except the Mississippi, where they would recommend that limit be 42. And the caveat to this is that no fish above these limits would be allowed to be harvested. So the thinking is that you'd be protecting that one great big fish every day, but you'd let more fish of the smaller fish be harvested. And our staff does not support this proposal. We have not had issues with our catfish populations that we feel we need to correct. We are concerned about the amount of mortality that those fish will be exposed to as they grow from 34 to 40 inches. that cumulative mortality in the up to 5 years it takes for those fish to get from 34 to 40 inches could do more harm than just taking one fish every day. And in fact, we believe it would. Some of the modeling we've done demonstrate that at the 40-inch level. So at this time, this was not something that the agency proposed, nor is it one that we support. So that concludes the commercial fishing preview, if you want to have any questions on that.
Thank you so much, Frank. Any questions from the commission?
Frank, well, that's loud. The second proposal about the nets, is that just on Pickwick, Kentucky Lake, and Barkley too? Or is that statewide?
No, it would be statewide.
Okay.
All flake nets would be allowed to have the 100 feet, especially with that twine being thicker. We're not concerned about all the issue about that. The length of that lead revolved around how thick the twine was. It's a pretty technical fishing thing, but it's important.
Commissioner Sanders?
Frank, can you go back on the slides?
Maybe. I can.
Go to the first one, I guess the change in times.
Sure.
Thank you. Have we had any comments at all from the recreational fishermen on this?
The expansion of the extra hour in the morning, I've not had any negative comments on that. And no, we have not.
Okay, and what is it that the commercials fishermen are wanting?
They would like to be able to finish work at 7 o'clock in the morning instead of 6 o'clock.
Okay. So we're saying start at 7 and finish at 6.
Well,
That's your
no,
recommendation.
their request is to start. Yeah, maybe what you said. Yeah, sorry. All right.
Their request is,
Yeah.
our recommendation is right there at the bottom.
Right.
The 7 to 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right. And secondly, the last slide that you did not, the agency is not supporting. Can you expand a little bit on what you said, the harm from 34 to 40 that
Sure.
occurs? You feel like it would be greater than harvesting one
Right.
fish a day?
Right.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah, so when we look at the growth rate of catfish, and this regulation pretty much revolves around blue catfish, which is what all the fish are that we're really talking about here in the majority of fish. When you start talking about fish that are getting 40, 42 inches especially. When we look at the growth rates of catfish, we see that at 34 inches, I believe they're about 12 years old. And when the catfish is 12 years old, there's not a lot that's really eating them. Their survival rate improves when they get older for a while until they get too old. Well, they're in that sweet spot where they're probably going to have pretty good survival in the next few years while they're growing. But their growth rate slows down, at least their length. You may get fatter, but their length actually slows down as they grow. So the time that they spend growing from 34 inches to 40 inches, for example, is years. And during those years, all of those fish would be open for unlimited harvest with commercial fishing. So you look at the total number of those fish, you're losing your opportunity to put the bigger fish into the system. So that's the concern and the balance there. Even though even though a great big trophy, like 100-pound catfish that might get caught by a commercial fisherman would die because it was harvested, it's still maybe better than having unlimited number of these fish that are in their prime 32 and to 40 getting caught out, because there are a lot of fish in this range. That's why there's interest in harvesting these fish. So we like the fact that there's a lot of them available. And the other piece of this that we're really not talking about today, but it is important to remember, we have a similar regulation for sport anglers. So we want to think about how their their opinion would be about this as well. And if we pursued this any further, would they both be the same? Should they be the same? That's a whole other discussion that I'm not prepared to discuss today. Sure.
Commissioner Gardner?
All right, Frank, Kurt may ask this or close to it, but on the first slide or second slide where you're talking about the nets, I mean, you're talking about the line that you're using, cotton or linen line, and you said most of the time that would be tarred. Why wouldn't you put tarred cotton or linen in there and specify that it will be tarred versus?
If it's that thick, it won't matter. I'm just saying, just as a
Okay.
practicality to protect their gear, they're going to do that so they can keep it for more years than if they don't tar it.
I see. So it's not more harmful to
No,
the
I
fish
wouldn't-
if it's
no.
not tarred?
No.
Okay.
We have similar netting, similar material on our trap nets that we run every year for crappie across the state, and you just don't have fish getting caught in those things at that thickness.
Okay, and then secondly, we talked about this very same proposal as far as the length, expanding the length a couple of years ago. And I thought there was supposed to be a study done that was supposed to help us kind of understand what size fish we've got. And can you, is that
When you're
true,
talking,
or
are
am
you
I
talking about
missing- am I
catfish?
not remembering correctly? Correct.
Yes, there was a study on catfish populations on fish, waters that were fished commercially and waters that weren't. The study lakes were Kentucky Lake, Chickamauga Lake, Fort Loudon, those three. Yeah, and those lakes provided the data that we were able to look at growth rates and model some of these questions about are you better off protecting these bigger fish or not. But one of the interesting results of that study was that the commercial fishing, the lakes that had commercial fishing had very healthy catfish populations, and that's something that people need to know. It's not at the level we're at, it's not a detriment to those populations. And we also saw fish grew older on the lakes in Fort Loudon, but they didn't necessarily get any bigger. And they were kind of a younger population on Kentucky Lake, but that was just an interesting difference between the two. But that is where we have some idea of the growth rates of these blue catfish in our systems, is from that study that was completed in 17 or so at Tennessee Tech.
All right, so just to follow up on that, so you still think that the impact that neighboring states like Arkansas and others who don't have a length limit on the Mississippi River in particular, that still doesn't play a role that, maybe our guys are at a disadvantage that go fishing versus in Arkansas?
On the Mississippi River, I haven't really spoken to that specifically yet. You're right in that the other states that we share the Mississippi River with have virtually no size restrictions on the fish that are coming out. So we're kind of going it alone trying to manage that river, which is difficult. And what we need to have is the states that we work with come together that we have a structure to work that in, and currently we're working through a paddlefish question with that same group. When that group is done with the paddlefish, I'm hoping that we, as multiple states, can get together and manage these interjurisdictional fisheries. So, in the meantime, I don't have any reason to change what we have until we can approach the other states and arrive at something better together.
Thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions from the commission?
If I could just ask one question. The commercial fishermen were asking to fish until 7 a.m. or operate.
Yes.
Do we have numbers on how many craft that is or how many watercraft that is that they're operating compared to recreational, and how much disturbance that would really be?
There's, we're talking maybe 15 commercial fishermen on the water in the morning at 7 o'clock. We're talking about nets in places where crappie fishermen might be headed to go. One thing I'll say, it's not like they've got every net out at whatever the cutoff time. I mean, they're working towards that cutoff time. And in theory, they should have very few nets to go at that time. But that'll be the case no matter what time we pick. I mean, I don't know if they're going to sleep an hour longer and then go out, or are they going to go and get everything off the water clean before then. But it's, I guess I'm just concerned that even though it's only another hour, we're getting into that magic hour when people are done with their breakfast, putting their boats on the water and getting out there. So, you know, this partitioning in time is for the benefit of the commercial fishermen and the sport anglers, and we're trying to keep the peace that we have. We don't know if we should, you know, I don't know if the recommendation would be to mess it up and then fix it, or try to keep it at where we're at. So this is what we're trying to do.
Understand. And no way to segregate commercial fishermen netting is fine until 6 a.m. except Asian carp, and that's okay till 7? Be difficult.
I think the intent of this is for the Asian carp, and I think the new interest in this is all. I think there's going to be a lot of Asian carp fishermen doing this. So I don't think they're. I mean, I don't know how many people are out there in April and May doing other things, but I know that the carp folks will be busy. That can be a time of year when the river is up and it's difficult to fish outside of these embayments too sometimes. So that's something.
It just might be that some sportsmen or the recreational anglers would be really understanding of, look, a lot of these are people trying to remove Asian carp that help your fisheries. So just a thought.
I agree.
Commissioner Zander?
Real quick, the Asian carp are wreaking havoc on the sport fishing side in these lakes and tributaries, right?
People are still fishing for crappie and bass on these lakes despite Asian carp, and there's a grave concern for what the carp could do. But I think
okay, that was my question.
yeah,
there is concern that, especially in the backwaters and stuff, that the Asian carp can do enough damage that it seriously affects the sport fishing side of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a real quick question.
Sure.
On the time, 6 a.m., 7 p.m., the recommendation, that daylight saving times, is it 7 all the year? You wanted, is it?
Well, it's only going to be in April and May. Remember, we're only talking about 2 months here.
Okay.
And so it shouldn't change during then. That happens in March, I think. And we're, by limiting it to Kentucky and Pickwick and Berkeley, we're not messing with the time zone difference, because that's where this got a little stranger when you start thinking about what it looks like on a reservoir over in East Tennessee if we put a hard time on it. But I think if we limit it to Kentucky Lake or that part of the state, we'll be in good shape.
Great. Any questions from the public? Mr. Frank Fiss? Mr. Clay Young?
Yes. I'm going to speak on behalf of the CFAC. These were our proposals that we made. The hoop net, trap net, that we're totally agreeing on that. The time frame here, I'm going to come back to that, and if y'all could let Neil, he's a full-time carp fisherman for me, and he'll kind of explain on that. The catfish, you know, we wanted to discuss that about the trophy catfish. You know, that's been a problem that sport fishermen have had with commercial fishermen, that we took that one big cat all the time. So we made this recommendation thinking that, you know, now the trophy fish will not be messed with, and we would go down into the size that a lot of the carp guys and stuff, they catch, you know, that 38 to 40 inch fish in their carp nets. It helps them make more money. That's on Kentucky Lake and Barkley. The Mississippi River, Illinois, Mississippi, Arkansas, Kentucky, Missouri, and Illinois, and I'm not sure about Iowa. Nobody has any kind of maximum size limit. And when you call Arkansas, they said there's no need for it. They, I think they did a little testing last year. One of the fishermen I know, Jeff Quinn, their chief of fisheries, went out with them. Absolutely, you know, filled the boat with all sizes, no problem, and they're not going to change anything. I think this is a recommendation. Me personally, I don't think there should be a size limit on the Mississippi, but we're trying to work with sport fishermen there, give them the trophy fish, keep it at 42. You know, that lets us catch a good sized fish, carp fishing, buffalo fishing, paddle fishing, and we're throwing the trophy fish back. So, Neil, if you'll speak on that right there.
Hi, my name is Neil Matlock.
State your name. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I go ahead? Oh, yeah. My name is Neil Matlock. I'm a commercial fisherman for North American Caviar. I have a family. I have young children. And these times, I mean, there's a lot of days that I'm gone all night that I don't get to see them because of these times. Because I have to wait till, 7, 8 o'clock, which is, my kids get home from school, and I see them about an hour, and then I'm gone all night. So what I'm trying to do, get my nets out early. It takes about 2 hours to get your carp nets out. I'm trying to get them out so I could spend that 7 to 9, 7 to 10 and see my kids. And then I get up every morning at 2:30 and pull. And most of the time I'm off the water by 7, but when you put it at 6, I'm having to get up an hour earlier, or I'm having to hire more help to try to get off the water early. And then, and during this time, the water's starting to warm up, your carp are dying, and, you want to get your nets up as quick as possible, but sometimes it's, you have problems, and you know how you have, like sometimes net may get in the motor and you get held up, and that 7 o'clock time just makes a big difference. I mean, it just gives you, that window there allows, I mean, it's just you're not rushing so hard. You're not going so fast and make a mistake. And if you make a mistake, then you're tearing your gear up. So, we just, yeah, the bait fish stay in the bays. At this time of year, the bays are just packed full of them. And when we can't go in there and fish them, not only are the bait in there, the crappie are in there, obviously, but it's full of carp. And every sport fisherman that I've spoke to says, "Why aren't y'all fishing the bays? Why are they not letting y'all fish the bays?" I said, "Well, it's it's an agreement between us and y'all. We don't want to be out there when y'all are fishing because we don't want their gear in our nets. But I'm not getting any feedback from any of them that says we don't want you there. They want us there. They're like, please get them all. So we don't want a lot. We just want a little give on our times. So thank you."
Appreciate it. Commissioner King?
This is for Frank. I think Commissioner Stroud asked you, no, somebody asked about the sports fishermen, any feedback? And you said that you've talked to them, but other than just one-on-one like that, how would they know? How would they know to give feedback? Like, if this is the first time we're hearing it, how does the average sport fisherman know that?
I think if people were, like when we added the hour, if the next year, April rolled around and people were hanging on nets and surprised to see people netting where they never saw them before because they were supposed to be out of there by that time, they would call, believe me. And I asked our Region 1 staff, are you hearing anything? And the creel clerk is out there talking to people. Okay. They're not asking that question specifically, but that is one of the many ways we get feedback too, is just being around people that are on the water. And it's a question that it's a fair question to ask. Where do we put this?
Both groups happy there'll be more understanding now, I think, because we are trying to. We both got a common problem, and so there may be more understanding. But you ask the chairman.
Yes, sir. Step to the mic, please.
I think the consensus right now with sport fishermen on Kentucky Lake Barkley is they want the carp gone. I mean, they don't want them there. So they, the only way to get them is for us to go get them. I mean, we're the only defense. So, like I said, I haven't had any feedback from not one sport fisherman that said, you don't need to be here. they're saying, why aren't there more of you? You know, why are y'all not in here catching these carp? So, I mean, I don't know what else to do, but go catch them. So, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? That's it. Frank, thank you so much.
Okay. If it pleases the commission, I'll go to the next presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Thanks, Richard. So the next presentation is our sport fishing preview. And each year we ask for public comments in April, and we review those, and we work with our biologists in May to see what we want to bring for this fall or August meeting. And we went through that process this year. So these are the regulations that we have. We will also have a process for the public between now and the next commission meeting. So if we present anything here, that they'll be able to see it in the press release and know what's coming. So we would hope to hear from them as well between now and the next commission meeting, or actually well before the next commission meeting. So I'll just jump into what the proposed sport fishing recommendations are. Carroll Lake is going to be reopened on April 4th of 2020. It's been shut down for a few years because of the flood that took out the gates. We had to refill the lake, renovate the lake. So it's all set up to be fished by the public, and we've got to put some constraints on it. So we have a suite of rules that we have had success with on new lakes. And that is, bass 5 per day, 15-inch size limit, 20 a day on brim. Catfish, no limit. Again, they still have the 1 a day over 34. And walleye we have to mention the walleye size limit because we're doing something a little different on this lake where we're stocking walleye to add another species of interest for fishermen, and they may help control some abundance of fish because, we have a hard time getting biological controls because people aren't, if we don't have bass where we need them. But anyway, it should be interesting to see the walleye in this system, how they do. We're just trying it. We don't know what to expect. We also will have a no limit on crappie on this reservoir. We're not managing it for crappie. We don't want crappie in there. Should a crappie get in there somehow, we want everyone to know they can take it because crappie management in these small systems can be disastrous. We don't want to do it. On some of our older lakes, Lake Graham and Glen Springs, we've had trouble keeping the bass numbers low enough. So we have the current limit is 10 fish per day with a protected slot where they can only have 1 over the 18. But it's really important that people take the 10 per day under the slot to allow the fish that are left to grow better. But people aren't getting that message, and we're not being successful with this slot limit. So we're recommending on both of these lakes, proposing no limits on bass. No size limit, no creel limit, come have at them. We don't know what else to tell you. Come take these bass. And we're going to watch this and see how this lake responds. Hopefully it will, because it's the last, fisherman involved solution that we have to grow bigger bass in these lakes. They're very abundant in there. On Pin Oak Lake, we work with the state park people to manage this lake, and they've requested that we put in our proclamation a prohibition on trot lines and limb lines. This is a high-use lake. I guess they are having problems with people getting them in their face along the shoreline when they're hanging, or getting hung up in gear if they're left out. Those are the typical complaints about trot lines and limb lines. They also requested that we limit jug fishing to 10 jugs per boat. Also, they want to prohibit jug fishing on weekends when they're their highest use. That would be Friday at noon through Sunday from April 1st through September 30th, and they've included a few holiday periods where they would not like to have jug fishing going on. Back over in East Tennessee here, on Fort Patrick Henry Reservoir, we've had an 18-inch size limit and 5 per day creel on bass since 2008 when we went statewide on a lot of the lakes, smallmouth bass regulation. We've been watching this since then, and this lake is not producing the results that we wanted to see from that size limit. So we're recommending that we propose a 15-inch size limit on these fish, and it would be a 5 per day in combination with other bass. So we're just lowering the size limit from 18 to 15, and that's actually one of the recurring themes that we saw in the public comments this spring. We had several people ask us to consider that, and we did, and it was probably time to do that. The other advantage of this is it will bring Fort Patrick Henry will be 15-inch minimum length limit, and then all the reservoirs upstream of it will also be 15, so there'll be some consistency. We have 8 wild trout streams that we manage a little differently than other wild trout streams in the state. They're managed with artificial, required to be fished with artificial lures, and they have special limits on them. These 8 streams and Slick Rock Creek, which we co-manage with North Carolina, currently have a 1 fishing rod limit, and you can't fish it at night, basically. And these regulations have been on our books for a long time, to the point where we thought that we were doing it at the request of the Forest Service. When we circled back and asked, they thought we were doing it. So we don't really have a need to do this. We have many other trout streams and smallmouth streams, other streams in the state where we don't have these limits, and the fisheries are fine. So we just want to, that'll be a few less lines of confusion in the fishing guide if we take these out. So our recommendation is no pole, no time of day restrictions. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk about crayfish for a while. We have 92 native crayfish species in Tennessee, and we've got 3 exotics as well. But of the native ones, 28 species are protected as either endangered, threatened, or in need of management. And one of the issues we have, that's all been already established in the rule that was passed a year and a half or so ago. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm just talking about how we direct fishermen to use crayfish so that they don't violate that rule. And crayfish, to me, are very similar in appearance. We may have some crayfish savants here that just see it right away that they're not the same, but we don't think we can expect the public to be able to tell the 92 species of crayfish apart and know which ones are protected when 30% of them are protected. So we structure our regulations in the fishing guide so that people know what places to avoid so they don't have to worry about it. So that's where this discussion is going. So currently in our proclamation, this list of streams, which are small water bodies around the state, are currently closed to harvest, use, and possession of crayfish because there's a threatened or endangered species in there, and have been. This regulation has served us for tens of years at least. And this is where those places are. They're the lime green places on these maps. I hope everyone can see these colors. I'm having a hard time myself, but those green blotches there are just the small areas of the state where we tell people don't take crayfish, don't use crayfish, don't bring other crayfish in. So what we're proposing, because we've got an additional 17 new species of crayfish that we are already protecting, we're changing the fishing proclamation. We'd like to change the fishing proclamation to do the same for these new species. And that creates a longer list of 20-some streams where we would recommend no harvest, use, or possession of crayfish. And as you'll see in the map, these are actually pretty small water bodies. A lot of those stream names represent headwater streams. We're not talking about a lot of real estate in the state, but people would need to know if they're going to go out and collect crayfish or plan to use them in the stream where they're fishing or take them away, that they can't take them. And they can't take them for food either. That's another the Sport Proclamation affords people the authority to take crayfish for food only. So we'll go on with that. So that's all we're trying to do is add to the list of places where you shouldn't use or possess crayfish. Now, also in our current sport fish proclamation, we describe this method for taking crayfish. Any method except the use of explosives, chemicals, and electric fishing may be used. I mean, that just creates a lot of opportunities for crazy questions on the phone, like, well, what about this? When you mentioned these really dangerous ways to take crayfish, it really makes people more inventive than maybe they need to be otherwise. So what we're proposing is that we just tell people to use one of the legal gears that are provided to them in the bait proclamation, and I'll be getting to that in a minute. And we want to remind people that there's, when you see the gears that we recommend, they'll have every opportunity to take crayfish by hand, by dip net, and by traps that they can buy in the store. And right now they can't even use the traps that are store-bought. So we're making this easier on people that are taking crayfish. And we're reminding people that live crayfish should not be released. If you have a shrimp boil and you bring a bunch of fish in, or a crayfish in from Louisiana for a shrimp boil, those crayfish should not be released, ever. So that's the end of the bait, or the sport proclamation, and I'll get into the bait, but I'll be happy to take questions here if you'd like.
Thank you. Any question from the commission? Mr. Gardner?
Frank, on the Pin Oak Lake, you said they said they don't want any more jug fishing between April 1st and 30th on September 30th on the weekends. When you say they, who are you referring to? The Natchez Trace, the park people, or?
It's Natchez Trace Park people.
So can they dictate to us what we can allow or not?
No, but we usually cooperate with them to manage the best fishery we can both put forward together. So
Okay,
that's
so
why we're recommending.
And I guess where I'm headed with is, it seems like you're shutting out a whole group of fishermen for the weekend all through the entire summer on a 9,000 acre reservoir.
Mm-hmm. We have similar, I may need some help, we have some similar regulations on our own agency lakes for this, or I'm looking at, I know it's not the first, it won't be the first time in the fishing guide we have restrictions on jug fishing. I'll safely say that.
All right, and the reasoning for that is because they're usually out in the middle jug fishing, and you got ski boats and such like that?
It's a large enough lake that you do have that the big boating opportunity there where people are cruising around, so that would make sense that that's their concern.
All right, thanks.
But again, that's their request, and this is just to preview that. We were going to bring that to this commission next month. So.
Any other questions from the commission? From the public?
Okay.
Okay. Well,
I'll
Frank?
start now on the move into the bait proclamation, where we're going to continue on our discussion of crayfish. So crayfish are used as bait, and so we have some proposals to change. First of all the discussion that all the maps that I just showed you about places that are closed to used harvest and possession of crayfish would be repeated in the bait proclamation. It only makes sense to do that, so we would be doing that. That would be part of the proposal. The other issue that we want to address is we have a part of the state right now that we're in where we have crayfish in the water that either don't belong there or would wreak havoc if they left there, even though they're native species. Crayfish can be very territorial to the detriment of other crayfish when they're put in new environments. So what has been going on in this part of the state, the upper Tennessee watershed essentially, there has been a ban on, you can use crayfish while you're fishing in the creek, but you can't take them away from the water to limit the likelihood that people are going to move these things as bait around the state or even around the watersheds in East Tennessee. This has been going on for years, and it's proven effective. The current water bodies that are closed is the entire French Broad River system, the whole Holston River, so that's basically the whole system that covers the upper, that makes the Tennessee River, and then the Clinch River system and its tributaries. This regulation has been received pretty well with some education over time, and it seems to be working. Because of the new species that have been, well, actually because of some range expansion, I believe, of these invasive species, we want to add the Clear Fork and Big South Fork areas as places where we don't want people to move crayfish. They can fish with them, but we just don't want them leaving that watershed and going somewhere else. So I've got a map to show you here. The big orange, I guess, here in East Tennessee, those watersheds that are lit up are places where you can fish with crayfish, you just can't take them away for bait. And the proposal that we have will be to add these two little areas right here to that list where we know we've got crayfish that we should not be moving. We're fortunate to have a lot of information about crayfish in Tennessee thanks to one of our Region 4 biologists, Carl Williams, and Bart Carter, who's here too. So we've got a pretty good handle on this, despite there being a pretty hard animal to keep up with. So that's the only additional restriction on the wares and what you can do with crayfish in the bait proposal. The other thing we want to do is modify the definition of that minnow trap so that you can use it for crayfish. And as I said earlier, we currently gave the people that were taking crayfish for food just any means they wanted, but we were requiring people to harvest them as bait using a specific list. So we want to make sure that there's adequate tools for them to use to catch crayfish on this list. So we're changing the current language of the minnow trap to accommodate crayfish. Currently, the important part here is that it has this part about the mouth opening where the fish swim in and get caught cannot exceed 1.5 inches in diameter. So you would limit it to smaller fish, which is what typically you're doing with minnows anyway. Well, if you were to go to the store and try to buy a crayfish trap, you would see that most of the openings are horizontal and they might be 6 inches wide, 4 inches wide, and you couldn't technically use that trap because it would be construed as an illegal minnow trap. So what we're doing is redefining this trap deal in the bait proclamation to say that it is defined as a device to use to catch minnows and crayfish, and eliminate that section about what size the diameter of the opening needs to be. So we're opening it up. So what this means is that readily available crayfish traps will be legal to use in places where you can use crayfish. I mean, we're doing everything we can to make it easy for people to catch crayfish where they can and make it clear where they can responsibly use crayfish. So I hope we're doing that. That would be part of this proposal. And with that, I'll shift gears off the crayfish and go to trout. Trout are used as bait, and they can be purchased from hatcheries for that purpose. They often are for striped bass fishing or smallmouth fishing at different sizes, or they can be collected from the wild by sport anglers. All game fish can be caught within legal means and used for bait as long as you're not exceeding the limit or size restrictions for that fish where you're fishing. So people use trout for bait. I want you to know that. And you should also know that we have whirling disease in the eastern part of the state. This is a parasite. It's like a parasitic jellyfish that gets into these wild trout populations and harms the populations. We were looking for them for years. We did find after our most recent searches in the last couple of years that we do have whirling disease in Wilbur, South Holston, Doe, and North Rivers. So that's a problem in its own. We haven't seen any population level impacts in those areas yet that we know of, but we certainly don't want this parasite or its spores to be moved about the state. So we've identified where we have it, and we propose that in the bait proclamation we say that wild trout caught from these locations may only be used as bait where you caught them, and they cannot be possessed alive away from the water. So there will be people that currently go to South Fork Holston River, below the dam there, catch brown trout, their legal limit of brown trout, and take them other places to catch striped bass that will be affected by this. And that's exactly the people we want to affect with this sort of proposal too, because we don't want those spores moved about. Okay, lastly, we have a section of the bait proclamation that addresses fish that can be harvested by bait dealers and sold only as dead bait. They can't keep them alive once they harvest them. And specifically, it's silver sides. They're little fish that would be hard to keep alive anyway, but that's the only species on that list right now. And we don't have Asian carp on that list. Right now, the only people that could sell you a dead Asian carp, nobody could sell you a live Asian carp, but a dead Asian carp would be a commercial fish or a wholesale fish dealer that had bought them. And the reason we did that early on was we were concerned when we were using eDNA and this was 5 years ago at least, that we might be limiting our ability to use eDNA if everybody and their brother was selling Asian carp that early in the game, so to speak. But now that we are working on Asian carp this long, we know that sport anglers are already catching Asian carp, using it as bait on their own. We already have commercial fishermen selling Asian carp for limb lines and stuff like that. We really don't think there's a need to take the bait dealers out of it. And there could be we've talked to the geneticists about what that does to our capabilities with eDNA, and we're comfortable if we allow this to happen. And the other benefit is that we routinely get questions from people about skipjack numbers, particularly in East Tennessee. And we're kind of hoping that people might migrate to using dead carp as bait instead of dead skipjack, and that might eliminate some of those concerns. So we would propose that bait dealers be allowed to harvest and then sell their Asian carp as dead animals. So that would be the end of the proposal for the bait proclamation and my presentations.
Great, thank you. Any questions, bait proclamation 1812, the preview from the commission? Ms. Connie King.
Was I confused about, right before the whirly thing?
Mm-hmm.
Did you say any fish can be used as bait, even a game fish?
Yeah, you could catch a legal size bass, keep it alive and within your creel limit, and put a hook through it and try to catch a bigger bass.
So a brim could be used, any size brim could be used as a bait?
There's a 4-inch trigger on the brim where they can be buy and sold. But if you personally catch I've got to check on that. But let's leave brim out of this. Okay. Trout, any other species? Because can anyone help me on the 4-inch? Yeah, if you'll allow.
That might be a good largemouth bass bait.
If brim are caught with legal sport fishing methods, rod and reel, they can be used as bait. There is a 4-inch maximum size limit for bait dealers to sell brim for bait. Sounds good. Right, correct.
Right. Yep. That's what I thought. Thank you, Jason.
That's right. Okay. Any other questions from the commission? Bait proclamation 1812 preview. Any questions from the public?
I need to make a motion. I've been sitting here, it's driving me crazy. But y'all are saying crayfish wrong. It's crawfish. And the spelling is even goofed up. So my motion is take the Y out, put the W in, and it's crawfish.
I'll second that. I'll second that. Thank you, Commissioner Stroud. All right, I think that's it. Concludes the information from Frank Fiss. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Appreciate it. Next
All
on the
right,
agenda.
that being said, we're going to take I really need to keep it to 10 minutes because we got a lot of stuff on the agenda. But a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back in.
So, he told me that, if we talked about that last night, I don't recall. Yeah. You're talking about paddle fishing, that particular instance.
When paddlefish season starts, we're limited to only 12 inches of any kind. 12 inches of any, okay. Well, that's gonna, they fish 30 minutes a day every day. fishermen and the age ships.
Okay.
That way they can fish their 12 paddlefish nets and then 18 or
So you're
5.
Okay,
saying
split it up, I see.
Yeah.
30
Oh,
with the
seven,
caveat that says no
Real
more than
technical.
12 paddlefish nets.
Yes, yes. They're not gonna get to fish any more paddlefish, it's just they would
Now
have
they
an
can, now they
opportunity.
can run these other, the
Yeah.
carp nets too.
What
Okay.
we didn't bring it up last year because what we tried to do is everybody got their helper commercial license where they could fish those nets.
Gotcha.
Well, when this guy quits, you just bought a $250 license. You gotta go buy somebody else every time you hire someone. Yeah, if I could just 1 minute more.
Yeah, sure.
Bring that up.
He just, just ask how to do that before they continue on to the next.
You just talk to Kurt. and let
Talk to Kurt and ask him which way, yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk to him for you and tell him that you have one additional thing
Yes,
that needs
for
to be
sure.
brought up for discussion.
I always come up with something like, I forgot to ask that. I hate, that's why I have to make all these notes, that's right.
I'm bad about asking too many questions.
Oh, I'm bad about, I got 17 notes. I'm like, where's my other note I was gonna talk about, so.
Well, I wanted to ask Frank,
Hey, Darren, will you get somebody to round everybody up? We'll get back in session. We'll start. I think Clay, you had one more comment, or Clay Young, didn't you have something? Sorry.
Yeah, I had forgot the CFAC. We forgot to bring this recommendation up back in June, and I wanted to see if we could bring it up for y'all to discuss it, you know, for future. When paddlefish season comes, the carp fishermen that have row permits, they're going to be limited to only 12 nets a day. So like Neil, for instance, he fishes 20 to 35 nets a day right now. When November 21st opens up, he's limited to 12. That's it, whether he caviar fishes or carp fishes. And we were hoping to see if we could do like a recommendation where the paddlefish guys that are in the aid ship program, just them, could fish their 12 paddlefish nets and maybe do like a 18 carp net, you know, something like that, to maybe a 30 net limit, something like that.
Okay. That's something you guys will think about, Frank. I'm looking through you, Neil, so.
Okay, thank you.
But that's all right. All right. You want to speak on that, or I'm fine if you just want.
On the mic, yes, we'll look into that.
Okay. All right. Good deal. Clay, thanks you and Neil for driving that far. So. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Chairman of the Boating and Law Enforcement Committee, Commissioner McLerran.
I call Darren Ryder, please.
Thank you, Chairman McLerran. I am so glad I fish in Middle Tennessee. Them crawdads don't stand a chance with me. I'm using them. I'm just kidding. So what this is a request for approval for a temporary suspension of a no-wake zone on Nickajack Reservoir. It's Proclamation 1907. And this is an annual request from the Outboard Drag Boat Race Association that goes in complements with a TWRA marine event permit that they get from this. So this suspension is temporary for the Marion County Park Boat Ramp for October 11, 12, 13, 14, 2019. And the suspension is for each day from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. And it's granted to the participants and officials of the event. And that's the request. Any questions?
Do I have a motion?
I think you vote on it tomorrow. Okay, gotcha.
Do we have a second? Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Any comments from the public? Are we ready for us to take a vote in favor of Proclamation 19-07? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it.
Thank you, Chairman. May I have just 1 second, please? And the reason why, it's noteworthy that we have a officer, Greene County officer, his name is Marvin Reeves, and he has 36 years plus service, and he will be retiring in November. And more importantly, he was 100% responsible for y'all's event this morning. So I just wanted to give him a thank you. He's not here today, but he had a great service with the agency as a wildlife officer, and he's to be commended for it. And lastly, but not leastly, that is actually Danette's brother. So we want to thank Marvin for his service and for what he did for y'all today. So I just wanted to give him a kudos while I had the opportunity.
Hold up, Darren. You got something you want to say? Yeah. Okay. If we can put a slide up on the, I just want to put this up. Darren, I don't know if you've seen this, but is in USA Today, talking about the law enforcement effort that was in Henning, Tennessee, looking for the escaped convict. But as you know, as you notice, front and center is a green truck, one of our officers. But just our guys always come through and are always there. Everybody, you know, I don't think people realize who they call when the things get tough, or at night, or when they need four-wheelers or boats. But our guys put their lives on the line to help these other law enforcement agencies, and I just want you to know, and your officers to know, that they have our full support, and we appreciate them.
That means a tremendous amount, Commissioner. Thank you so much. In talking with those guys, we allocated about 7 men per day on this effort, and then, as you well know, Captain Grandstaff gave his presentation on the manhunt there in that Montgomery County deal last year, and then this event got through. The very next day, there was another fleeing felon that wrecked a car, and one guy was hurt enough that he couldn't get out of the car. The second person fled, so we were called to go to the Cumberland River to put an asset on the river. So our guys are incredible for what they do, and gals for their efforts on events like this. In talking to the folks that put forth effort here, the Marshal Service was extremely complimentary. They said they would not ever want to work any other event than with a game warden. They know every inch, every road, every creek, everything in them water and woods in their own county. So that's a huge asset on events like this. So everybody's been real complimentary of our efforts, and thank you for that recognition.
Thanks, Darren. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our Budget Committee Chair, Commissioner Sanders.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to call Director Carter up. And Frank, just so you know, I am a crawfish savant. I didn't realize it until James changed the spelling a few minutes ago. So I actually grew up catching crawfish on South Chick. So I'm glad it wasn't illegal back then. So.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. I was telling them we always put an L in it too. It was crawfish and crawdads, and anyway. I never was much of a cipherer or a speller, so. What I'd like to do today is bring forward the agency budget for the 2021 year and make a few changes, I hope, to this current year budget. And for the public's knowledge, and because I know they weren't at our budget meeting last time, but about a month ago, the 10 of the 13 commissioners were able to come to a budget meeting. So most of the people here today on the commission have already gone over this in great detail, and we spent almost an entire day just with the commission there. So if it seems at times like I'm going through things kind of quickly,
please yell and ask for details, but I think for the most part, I'd like to just hit the highlights where I can. Since that budget meeting that we had, the budget books have been mailed out, and I see that y'all have those now. And it has the details of all of the things that we've talked about in putting the budget together, what we'd like to see done, and a lot of detail on how things work inside the state budget system. The pages primarily that I'll be working from, and there's 3 of them out of that book, or in case any members of the public want them, are over there where Lee's sitting at the press table, then feel free to take those. Also, this is a reminder, in the budget meeting, we said, you know, here's where we are at this point in time. We know that by the time we get to the August meeting, that things will have changed. Books were closing, and we were also knowing that there were a few things that would come in later that we didn't know about, everything from purchase orders to changes in what we were doing in any one particular program. So being true to that statement, we do have some changes with you today that I'd like to go over. But essentially, when I get to the end of this, what I would be asking for is expansion to our current year budget. That's the one we're in now, 1920, that you actually passed last August, so it would be expanding what we're in now, but you passed primarily that in August of 2018. Then later on, ask for a proposed budget for 2021, which will begin July the 1st of 2020. Just a quick word or two about the process for people that weren't involved. We spend an inordinate amount of time inside the agency working on budgets. It'll start in about the middle of March, and it will go forward until we have our budget meeting with the commission, which is usually occurs in July or very early August. And all of those times we spend with each division going over every single item in their budget. And there are 500 budgets inside our agency, so some of the reviews take anywhere from an hour to 8 to 10 hours to go over each one of those. So I just say all that to let you know, and I'm sure most of you already know, that we already spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we spend the money wisely that we get from the sports people of Tennessee, the hunters, fishermen, boaters, and we want to make sure we use it to the best way that we can to further those programs. Along that line, let me mention that our funding primarily, as most of you know again, that it comes from licenses and boat registrations. We also get federal revenue that we get reimbursed after we spend something. We get a portion of that back, and it varies anywhere from 25% down to about 10%. But for the most part, if we spend $100,000, and it's a federal aid program, we'll get back $75,000 of that. So anyway, lots of moving parts in that. We also have the wetlands fund, and of about 2 years ago, or really about 1 year, we actually had the full benefit of the marine fuel tax, that being the taxes that are collected on boats that for fuel that's sold at marinas, not anywhere across the state except those on the water. And then we have our reserve funds, and our reserve funds are those funds that are left over at the end of any 1 year. So after we paid all our bills, the books are closed, we're going into the next year, the money that's left is what we call our reserve fund. Some folks would refer to it as a rainy day fund. And then we're a little bit different than other state agencies in that what we do have left over does carry over. A lot of other state agencies, since they get appropriations and are using tax dollars, when they get to the end of the year, their books close and they start all over with the brand new budget the next year. We start with whatever we've been able to sell in the way of licenses and registrations, plus whatever we've been able to keep over from the year before. We also have endowment funds. Most of those, there's really only about 2 that we really look at, one being the lifetime licenses and the other being the ones that are used on watchable wildlife plates and so forth. We utilize the interest off of those, and that doesn't amount to a whole lot of money, but we do have those 2 endowment funds that are there for our use. When you've got your budget book, there's included in that an executive summary, and just hitting the highlights of where we are in the budget. And I guess I would say that probably the best news in that is that the year that just closed, that being 18-19, we were able to add back to the reserve of approximately approaching about $7 million. So rather than taking money out of the license and boat registrations that we have, we actually put money back into the budget, and we expect that will carry forward into other years, but it's difficult to forecast that in some ways, but we'll talk more about that in a second. I'd like to kind of concentrate on, in your budget book, start off by saying there is a table of contents, of course, and that would guide you if you're looking for any one particular area that you might want to know more about, anything from contracts to equipment purchases, any of the details that you care to know. The contents page will direct you to that part of the budget book and what page it's on. But for the most part, I'll be working off of pages 1, 2, and 3, which are the agency summary budgets for the agency as a total, and then wildlife, and then boating. I would also, in just a few minutes, talk a little bit about wildlife expansions. So let me start with page 1 of your budget book. If essentially, when you're looking at that on page 1, it says annual budget comparison agency, and this is the entire agency budget. I'll just remind you, under state law, we have to keep boating and wildlife separate. We can't intermingle those funds. So when we prepare a budget, we do the same, so that you're looking at a combination of both wildlife and boating in this first page. And again, I'm going to kind of hit the highlights since most of you have heard it before anyway. But on the first column that you look at, when it's got the numbers 01, 02, 03, 04, down through 25, those are the budget categories that we work in, and everything that we do, everything that we spend or everything that we budget has to occur in one of those 25 categories. In doing that, that lets us know whether it's a professional service, whether it's equipment, whether it's a state charge, on and on till we get through that. Look into the column immediately to the right, it says 2018, 2019, and the column figures that end up at the bottom saying $92,235,348. That's the amount of money that was actually spent in 18-19. That's not a budgeted amount of money. That's what was actually spent in each of those categories. When you look across the page to the next one, you notice that it goes up significantly from 92 million to 124 million, and that's the year that we're in, being 1920. I would just, for a little bit of comparison, say that in 18-19, the budget for that year was actually 122 million, a little over actually. So although we only spent 92 million, we're actually budgeted to spend 122 million that year. I point that out for a couple of reasons. One, that's traditionally about where we wind up in our budgeting. We'll spend somewhere in the neighborhood of about 75% of what we have budgeted. And that's because some projects can't be completed. Some of the projects that we budget are on multiple-year contracts. Several different reasons for that, but in any case, we add expansions every year to every budget, and it's one of the things I'll be asking you to do here in a second to this current year that we're in, because sometimes we can't forecast what projects are coming. We don't know that funding from some of the federal agencies will be at a certain level. We don't want to plan a program until we know we actually have money in the bank to do that. If you look between 18-19 budget year and 19-20, so comparing last year into this year, one of the reasons that the middle column is always higher is that each year we have a number of things that we cannot complete. A lot of them are construction projects, some of them are land acquisition, big projects generally. We don't carry forward supplies, we don't carry forward all those kind of things. We only carry forward those things that have an ending that we couldn't put a closure to in the year before. So that being the case, from the books that just closed at June the 30th this last year, we're asking to carry forward about $12,700,000 into this current year that allows us to complete those projects that are already started. You already approved those in your budget of last year, but just for your knowledge, we're carrying those forward, and that's what makes that middle column so high up to the 124. On the very right-hand side, under 2021, is the area that we're asking for approval for that budget year, and that again, it compares to what we had budgeted on the what we spent on the far left-hand side. I have no doubts as we get into 2021, we'll be back again, and that number will probably climb back up into the 120, 125 million range in terms of budgeting, but expenditures are probably going to range somewhere about like they always do in the 92 to 95 to 96 million for actual expenditures. Looking down the page where it says funding sources, state reimbursement, license registration, reserve, federal revenue, those are the areas that we're pulling money from to fund all of those projects that you see above you there. No matter what they are, they're going to come out of one of those categories. And just real quickly to remind you what those are because they can be confusing. State reimbursement means money that we give to the state of Tennessee for various services, and sometimes we get part of that back. And if we do, that's what state reimbursement means. We're not expecting any for this next year, so it means we're not expecting to pay any, we're not expecting to get any back. So you can see that it's zeroed out. License registration, of course, is just that. It's in taxes. It's money from boat registration and money from license sales. The reserve is what I mentioned a minute ago. It's money that's still in our bank account that we had not spent from previous years. Federal revenues, again, amounts to about 35% of our budget, and you can see those numbers really vary. And it's not that we're losing federal aid when you see it go down, it just means we haven't spent it yet and haven't gotten it back. So that varies widely, but in terms of federal aid revenue available, it's pretty consistent for the last several years. Current services is when someone else writes us a check, a timber sale, or something else that brings in money from somebody outside of state government. And then interdepartmental or the wetlands funds that I mentioned earlier. So with that bit of explanation, I'll tell you that's the entire budget. If you could turn to the next page, page 2, as Paul Harvey would say. In 1819, again, it's the amount of money we spent. 1920, the amount of money that we're looking to put forward for this year, and part of that includes expansions that you have already identified in your book. On page 4, you can see expansions that are built into that amount of money that we're asking to add a little bit more than we had last year when we gave the budget to you. That being added in, but at the same time, I'll be asking for you to add wildlife expansions, and I think you should have a handout that we just gave out earlier showing a number of expansions totaling $1,355,950 that are expansions to this current year budget. It will have no impact on license money at all, as it is all federal aid. Somebody else is either making the match or we're using federal aid dollars on a program that we have that already has a match built in. So it would be expansions in those areas that I was just mentioned, the ones that you have on your sheet, and I can explain those in more detail if you want to go over those. But in any case, that will be an addition, which will raise the amount of money that we're looking for this current year. I'm going to go back again now for a second, if I can, to page 3. That's the boating budget. The boating budget is much smaller, as you might guess. And with the addition of the marine fuel tax, it's allowed us to do a little bit more, and it has also helped us out greatly in the fact that the commission did go forward with the boat registration increase. We were getting down to where the reserve was practically gone in boating, which is a scary place to be, and we can't fund those boating programs, but we're back up to the point now between the marine fuel tax and boat registrations that we feel pretty comfortable going forward with the same level of boating commitment that we've had in the past. Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it to you if you want to go over those expansions that you just got today. They have an explanation beside them. I might mention just that first one just because it's a fairly large, it's $1 million for land acquisition. That's a partnership with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation where they want to acquire some land for the Cumberland Trail, and it would go through that part of what we would call Looper Mountain WMA, and it would add about 5,000 acres to that, and they will need about 1,000 to 1,500. The rest of it will be turned over to the agency for hunting opportunities or those other wildlife activities that we ordinarily do in wildlife management areas. So that's probably the larger one in there. One that you might take great pride in is that the Tennessee Department of Agriculture is establishing a CWD testing lab, and that's what that particular amount of money is. We will take the money that was given to them and match it with federal aid money to come up with $150,000. We'll have our own testing right there on the campus at Ellington Ag Center. I think the rest of them are fairly self-explanatory, with the exception some of you are at the range today. I guess everybody was at the range today, and you can see what can be done with range expansions and range money. We're trying to finalize the Cumberland County shooting range, which is when you get a chance to go by there, it's a very nice facility as well. They need to complete their road system between all their different targeting, so we're asking for $140,000, and that's all federal aid as well. The other two, or three, I think are pretty self-explanatory, but Mr. Chairman, I'll not go into any more detail unless you want me to.
One question, Director, on the CWD lab. Is that any funding for actually developing the lab, or is that just for our costs in submitting samples and things to the lab?
Most of that is what we will pay back in having sampling done. They already have a lab that's an accredited lab, but they had to do just a few things in order to bring it up to standard for CWD testing. So primarily that's going to be what we'll utilize to pay them.
Okay, thank you. What I'm going to do, just to try to keep a little bit of order here, I'm going to open this up to the full commission as well, but the committee will be the only ones that are voting. Unless there is objection from the committee, I will take all 6 expansions as one. If there are objections, we'll take each individual one, but if not, we'll take all of them. And then we will also take a vote on the proposed budget as a committee. All right, so let's look at the expansions. So first I'll open it up to the committee. Are there any questions on any of the expansions as presented?
Commissioner, Chairman, Ed, what does the lab do at Ellington in the turnaround time on getting the results back? How much time is that going to save you guys?
I can't really give you a definitive answer, but in talking with the lab that it's down in Alabama, and then talking to Dr. Hatcher at Ag, we're thinking probably in the neighborhood of 2 weeks or less.
In savings, or just that's the turnaround?
In turnaround.
Yeah.
From the time they get it to the time we know what the positive or negative.
Okay.
Any other questions? Commissioner Gardner?
Director, when are they gonna start accepting these samples? And can the public submit them to this lab as well as, agency?
I'm not sure. I don't know if Joe, do you know that?
Yes, sir. Joe Benedict. Woo, sorry. Shocking. Wildlife Chief. The Cord Lab is hoping to begin to receive those samples in November. So there's some prep work they have to do, and then they have to be certified and trained by a national lab to actually run those samples for consistency's sake.
I think the question though, Joe, was can the public submit samples, or does it have to go through the agency?
I believe at this time they're looking to have all the samples come through us. There's a lot of logging in and invoicing that would have to go with the public, and I think there's also a question about reporting to individuals where we may not know if a sample is positive. So I think at this point it's going to be primarily through the agency.
Will we continue using whatever lab we've been using until this one's up and running in November?
Yes, we're gonna, we use Colorado State currently, and obviously the August season will start soon. We'll collect samples there. We collect roadkills now. So there'll be some kind of phase, overlap, and then eventually we'll phase, I believe, to mostly within state. But that'll take some time.
So we'll continue using Colorado State throughout the season this year for sure?
Right,
okay.
Right.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I might just mention to that, of those expansions of 1.3 million, only 148,000 of that is actually coming out of licensed dollars, although it's some other match that we'll be utilizing. Yeah, federal or wetlands fund or something else.
So 148 of the 1,355,950 is licensed dollars?
148,000. I had it rounded off. I'm not. I think that's what it is actually. 148,000 out of 1.355950.
Do you know which one of that is? Is that the Lone Star acquisition or?
No, sir. Let me look here real quickly. Actually, looking at my list here, I don't, of those, I must have been referring to my other page here. I don't see any of those that have any state money in them.
Our sheet says federal only.
Stand corrected. I think out of those expansions, some of the earlier expansions that we went into did have a little bit of state money in it, but under Lone Star is not, TDA is not, Cave Monitoring is not, Aerial Resources not. No, sir. There's none of that is. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. So are there any other questions on the expansions? Hearing none, any comments from the public? Seeing none, then committee only. I'll take a motion to approve all 6 expansions as presented for a total of $1,355,950.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion, we have a second? Have a second. Committee only, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Moving on, Mr. Chairman, to 2021, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
We have no changes in the boating budget in current year, and what's reflected in your book is what we'd be asking for next year in boating. So essentially, we'd be asking for your approval in 2021 of a total agency budget made up of $82,270,100 in wildlife, $13,352,400 in boating, and a total budget for the entire agency of $95,622,500.
All right. So we have the proposed budget. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second? Have a second. Any discussion from the full commission? Any discussion from the public? Have a motion and a second for the committee only. All in favor of passing the budget as proposed, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say thank you to you personally, because, and for those that don't know, in addition to the meetings that we have, there's a lot of dialogue that goes on personally between the budget chairman and the agency in working these things out. So appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that is all the budget committee has at this time, unless we're going to have Ken go like we had planned on doing. It's not on the agenda, but that was our plan.
I don't see him on either page, so I was thinking we might could leave him out. So where is Ken?
He is here.
Ken, are you prepared to go today?
Are you prepared to present your financials?
I have no financials.
Okay.
That's good.
June has
Me either.
I have no sense. June has not closed, and nor has July. So next month I'll have a financial report on July. All I can do is give you preliminary on June's closing for last fiscal year. And each day that goes by, the figure changes. It appears that what you're looking at there as a reserve balance increase for both boating and wildlife will probably be a little bit more than what you're looking at there, which is good. But I'll have more next month.
Well, that explains why he's not on the agenda for either day.
Right. He agrees with my daughter that the meeting should have been later. In the
Should have been later, yeah.
That's a long way of saying no, isn't it?
And Ken, just to remind you, it's our intent to have you present your financials on committee day in September.
That's fine. Be fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we're finished.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanders. I'm gonna, if you had an agenda, we went a little out of order just for time to make sure we had time for everything today. I'm gonna turn it over to our Wildlife Management Committee Chairman, Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask Pandy Upchurch to present the endangered species information.
All right.
Took me a minute to come up with it.
Thank you, Commissioner Gardner. Thank you, Commissioners. So what you have before you, and I'll have a stack of these later on for everyone, is this is a vision document for the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. So each of you have that vision document. So first of all, what is the Recovering America's Wildlife Act? So back in 2005, and this isn't going to be a long drawn-out history, don't worry, but back in 2005, every state was required to write a state wildlife action plan in order to be able to get federal dollars to manage what they considered species of greatest conservation need. Unfortunately, the money that was appropriated annually through Congress was not enough money for each of the states to implement their state wildlife action plans. So back in 2005, we had 664 species of greatest conservation need. These are at-risk species. These are threatened, endangered species deemed in need of management species that require management efforts from the state agencies. Now in 2015, or back in 2015, we also wrote a state wildlife action plan. Those 664 species of greatest conservation need has increased to 1,499 species because we included plants in that. But again, the money that we are appropriated annually from Congress is not enough for us to actually implement the state wildlife action plan that the agency creates in order to manage for those species of greatest conservation need. So the Recovering America's Wildlife Act is to non-game what the Pittman-Robertson Act is to wildlife and what the Dingell-Johnson Act is to fisheries. It would be money allocated annually, dedicated funding sources to non-game, especially species of greatest conservation need, that would help every state implement their state wildlife action plan. And so it was recommended that each state create a vision document on how would they spend money appropriated annually from Congress for non-game species of greatest conservation need. And that is what this document is. So what we did is we went through our state wildlife action plan. We looked at our accomplishments, especially since 2005, and showed what we have done with the limited amount of resources that we have had through the years, but also what could we do if we had, and I'll guide you to the main numbers page, if we had $20 million appropriated annually or dedicated annually just for species of greatest conservation need. What could each state do if they had that much money that they could spend on their at-risk species? And so that is also a part of our vision document. You'll notice in the vision document what we've already done. What we've already done is we have protected 2 caves, gray bat caves in particular, that have saved 600,000 endangered gray bats. We have accumulated an incredible amount of data. We've grown mussels at our Cumberland River Aquatic Center. We've released 98.9 thousand rare mussels into the native streams of Tennessee. We've accumulated 12,000, or we've created 12,000 acres of native grasslands in East Tennessee that helps non-game species, GCN species, as well as the northern bobwhite quail. And so we've done a great deal of work throughout the state, and we've worked with partners, in particular universities across the state. Much of the money that we get from the federal government from species of greatest conservation need is money that we contract with universities to do a great deal of research on disease such as bee-sow, which affects salamanders around the world, ranavirus, chytrid fungus that affects amphibians, snake fungal disease that affects snakes, reptiles, and we're trying to prevent diseases from wrecking wildlife populations. We could use this, if necessary, on CWD. If we had additional funding, again, the $20 million annually, what we could do is we could have things like a statewide burn team where we could create additional acreages of early successional habitat for things like quail, but also our bird species that we consider GCNs, such as Henslow sparrows, and that such. We could also create water security for our Cumberland River Aquatic Center, the place that houses thousands of endangered species we have our water supply for that is at risk. We can't control the temperature or the ammonia in that, and so at some point in time, it would be great if we could actually have a water treatment plant for that Cumberland River Aquatic Center, which could cost millions of dollars. We could also protect critical habitats. We're already protecting critical habitats, but we could protect more critical habitats of endangered species. We could prevent more extinctions. We could propagate more of those endangered mussels. We could also maintain diverse gene pools by removing the obstructions in many of our streams, such as low-head dams that prevent mussels and fish from getting together so that the mussels can reproduce, but also our deadly low-head dams in our streams that boaters and paddlers kayak. And we could find cures for more or for new wildlife diseases and old wildlife diseases. And then number 7, we've been talking about already, we could use this money for Asian carp decreasing. So it's a pot of money that the whole state could use. We've proven our success with the limited amount of funds that we have gotten, but with $20 million a year, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act could help us with many of our species of greatest conservation need. So this is a bill that's in Congress. So this document that the Outreach Division helped me put together, helped the Biodiversity Division put together, has already been passed out in Congress to our legislators. The Recovering America's Wildlife Act is in the House at this time. Tennessee is stepping up. We have Chuck Fleischman is sponsored or is supporting this bill. Jim Cooper is supporting this bill. Steve Cohen is supporting this bill. And Senator Alexander will be co-sponsoring this bill as it enters the Senate. So Tennessee is really being proactive on this Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And again, this will be a sub-account of the Pittman-Robertson Fund, but again, it will be as large as Pittman-Robertson and Dingle Johnson has been to sport fishing and hunting, but it will be for species of greatest conservation need and non-game animals. And does anyone have any questions? I appreciate the time. And I will have some copies of this vision document over there where Lee is, where we seem to put things such as this, and folks are welcome to pick up a copy.
Well, as always, it's a great presentation. Appreciate the information and the nice booklet that has quite a bit of good information. I haven't had a chance to read all of it, but I also appreciate learning the new word of hibernaculum.
It's where bats spend the winter.
Yeah. So, any discussion from the commission? Any questions?
Commissioner Stroud?
Yeah, who designed this?
Our outreach department designed this. So Jennifer and Austin, we provided the information from our state wildlife action plan, and I have to, and Region 3 really stepped up. Daniel Istvanko provided a lot of, where's Region 3? A lot of pictures for this, and so, yeah, so.
Hats off, this is really, really first class.
Most of these pictures are from our own people in the agency, and then our own agency, our outreach department division designed it, and then we had it printed, so. Everybody's been very impressed with it.
Any other questions? Oh, well, thank you, Pandy. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chairman, turn it back over to you.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Kent Woods, who's the chairman of our Government Relations Committee.
Go as fast as I can. Thank you, Commissioners. Chairman Woods. I really have a brief, just update piece of information for you. We were in front of the Government Operations Committee both in June and July, and 3 of the most recent rules that you passed, both the Native Son rule, which actually you passed back in January but was caught up in Executive Order 5, has now been unanimously approved by the Government Operations Committee with a positive recommendation, along with our rule changes relative to boat registration fees and our permanent versions of our CWD rules. All of those rules were considered by GovOps and were unanimously recommended for positive recommendations. So all that is positive movement for those rules. Just another piece of information, the General Assembly will have a special session next week with a primary focus on electing a new speaker. Certainly appears, unless there's something very dramatic that changes between now and next Friday, that Cameron Sexton from Cumberland County will be the new Speaker of the House, at least for the remainder of this General Assembly. And we're just moving down the track. So all things are positive. We had great participation today at the shooting range from both Chairman Steve Sutherland of the Senate Energy and Ag and Natural Resources Committee and Representative Hawk, both who represent Greene County, joined us today, and we had some good, productive conversations with them. So we'll keep working. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
All right.
Thank you.
He don't hear any, he said. All right. Any member of the public got any more comments? Director Carter, you have anything? Good, okay. No, I'm kidding. Do you have anything?
Just one quick thing. Recovering American Wildlife Act, we've been working on that for at least 3 years, trying to put it together. So when it was first introduced in the House, it has been gone through all the steps. When introduction in the House, I was asked to come and be a part of a press conference when that was going to be introduced. We had Representative Fortenberry from Nebraska and Representative Dingle from Michigan, who were the two sponsors. She was late coming to the press conference, so we had 30 minutes to stand around and talk. I want you to see how impressive I was. He said, we talked for a minute, and Representative Fortenberry said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Tennessee." And he goes, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, do we have an interpreter in the room?" So just wanted you to know I was glad for you.
Thank you, Director Carter. And it seems like every month we're seeing you on the national headlines for some reason. So it's all good. That's what's surprising. It's all good. So anyway, but if nobody has anything else, we'll hold this meeting or call this meeting adjourned. Tomorrow will be an exciting day. We're going to draw for the elk raffle winners. So a lot of people will be watching online. So, but anyway, 9 a.m. Meeting's adjourned.
Yes, we did.